Do you think that we really thought if we killed a religious leader, Khamenei, that somehow that would be a good thing for the United States? Like,
Yeah,
is
I
that
mean,
really, you think, the expectation?
well, according to Trump, he was one of the most evil people in history, and he's basically liberated the Iranian people, or we've taken a very important step in that direction. It's absurd. First of all, if you were actually concerned about the development of a nuclear weapon or nuclear weapons in Iran, you should have done everything to protect, to ensure the longevity of Ayatollah Khamenei, because he was the main obstacle to it. He was the one who issued the fatwa long ago, no nuclear weapons. I think it was well over 20 years ago that he did that. And there are officials in Iran that have voiced frustration, but he has been firm on that, no nuclear weapons. So now you take out, first of all, the main obstacle to it. And then also he's not just the supreme leader of Iran, he's a religious leader for all Shia. And so you have made yourself an enemy of all Shia around the world. And we're seeing some of the consequences now. There have been people, crowds gathering, around embassies, and for example, in Iraq, the Green Zone in Baghdad. So there's a real likelihood, or maybe I shouldn't say a likelihood, but a real possibility that some of these embassies may be stormed, and as a direct consequence of the assassination of the Ayatollah. It doesn't make a bit of sense to me. It just doesn't. Again, it's just sort of I have to go back to Russia again, because again, there's this obsession with Putin as being some sort of incarnation of Hitler. He's the very incarnation of evil. But as we all know, people who actually follow Russian politics, Kremlin, the Kremlin closely, we all know that actually Putin is a moderate. He's the one that's holding back, the nationalists, the ones that want to strike back hard, the ones who want to, retaliate in kind every time that Russia suffers an attack. And yet there is this thinking, again, it's just not based on any reality, because they don't seem to really have any desire to understand who the Russians are. They just have this, this figment of their imagination, that they're obsessed with, that they need to destroy. And I think you could say the same thing about the Ayatollah in Iran. It doesn't make a bit of sense. I think there's no question, but that not just the fact you've taken out the Ayatollah Khamenei, again, who was a moderate and was in so many ways, and was holding back the nuclear weapons program. By your attack, you have given a lot given a tremendous boost, to the hardliners within Iran. Of course, that's how do you think they're going to react, right? It's just like, now we understand, these people are they're out to destroy us, and we just have to fight to the end. So that's what we're seeing. That's the obvious result. It just always seemed obvious to me, but I don't think it was obvious to Pete Hegseth or Trump.
I think they all drank the Kool-Aid of their own propaganda, assume, okay, well, this is Satan and that guy's Satan, so we just kill Satan, right? We kill Hitler, and then it'll all be good, and everybody will love us, and it'll be, great victory. We go home and get our medals, and that's it.
Right. But that's the way it works in the comic book world,
Yeah, it's just an amazing intelligence failure. I guess there was just such an effort to just only focus on anything evil about Iran, and that's the only thing they see, because I don't know much about Khamenei. I don't know much about Shia. I'm not a Muslim. Mm-hmm. I don't know much about Islam, but from the clips that I have always seen of Khamenei, he just comes off to me as a nice, humble guy. It just seems I do not get this vibe of evil, and really just, since the Gaza conflict especially, but just over the years, I'm having more and more respect for Iran and for Shias, because I'm seeing what the Houthis were doing. And so to me, I think, and even more so now, after this, I think this is what's happened. You not only ignited all the Shias, you have ignited the world now against you. I mean, you killed an 86-year-old man in his home with his granddaughter. You martyred him. Why would you do this? Scott Ritter I saw him making this argument, like if the way to do it is to not kill him, to try to humiliate him, emasculate him, and say like, look, he's hiding, he can't, he's sent to have the Iranians are dying and he's in his bunker, things like this. That's the way to do it. Instead, they martyr him from day one. And then also, one of the first things that we bombed was an elementary school for little girls. We slaughtered over, I think, 160 girls between the ages 7 and 12. Just think about if those were your kids.
Right.
If you were in a country, think about how angry a country will be if you bombed a school, an elementary school for little girls. And just think about that. And then we can also just think about how angry you would be. Mm-hmm. And then we also have to just think about what Israel's been doing in Gaza. Every day they've been doing something like this. Thousands, just these kids. And I just don't understand. Was that an accident when we bombed the school? Why would we do that? Mm-hmm. How did that happen?
Right. Well, it's certainly possible that it was let's say a missile that malfunctioned or that maybe had been deflected by air defense. That's a possibility. You have to say that. We don't know that it was intentional. Now, I don't like to believe, I don't think that it would be intentional on part of the Americans if it was a Tomahawk launched. Perhaps I'm being naive, but I just don't think that we have fallen to those depths yet. Now, in the case of Israel, I don't know, because we've seen what they've done in Gaza. They have intentionally attacked schools, many schools, hospitals, refugees hiding in their tents and so on. They have, we have very firm evidence that they're deliberately sniping little kids, the bullets striking the heart or the head. And so we know that, the IDF is certainly capable of doing something like that. Now, why they would, maybe it's just they would, if it was them and it would be justified, maybe trying to create terror or chaos within Iran. I think, those kind of justifications, again, are used by the Banderites, or in Ukraine, for these obvious civilian attacks. It never works, though. So, there's never any evidence that it works. It always has the opposite effect. So if it in fact was intentional, I think it's just plain old bloodlust. It's just people that kind of glory in death and destruction, and this was a chance to do it. But we don't know that it's intentional. Going back to actually, because you started off your recent statement talking about Khamenei and what kind of man he was. I learned quite a bit about him from Professor Morandi. Said he's first of all, he's a scholar of Persian literature. He's fluent in 4 foreign languages, one of which is English. And I have been seeing a lot of his tweets, actually over the last couple of months. And I am struck by how reasonable they are. Right. It's just like you don't get any sense of some fire-breathing monster. Quite the opposite. You do get the sense this is an 86-year-old scholar. That's the way. Now, perhaps he's... I'm not Iranian. I don't know what's happens in domestic Iranian politics. And if there are people that are frustrated with his policies or very angry about the current system of the government, okay, that's for you Iranians to fight out. But I'm just looking from the outside, and I can see a man that is highly intelligent, very cultured, and far more intelligent, far more cultured than just about any politician, in the American political scene or the West in general. I mean, this is the embarrassment that we find again and again. I just contrast, this man with our President Donald Trump, who described him as one of the most evil men in history. Just an absurd statement. And where did he get that idea? I doubt, we're not sure that Donald Trump has ever read a book. Somebody said that he's read one. I don't know. But, he watches Fox News all the time. That's probably his source of history and how he knows that so-called knows that the Ayatollah was one of the most evil men in history. The contrast is embarrassing. It's, and it's, again, it's shameful. We stop and look at it. Let's stop engaging in all this kind of these comic book level, analysis, if you even want to call it that, dignify it with that term.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of people are realizing that we've been lied to about Iran and the Ayatollah and this propaganda because, like I said, I've been seeing a lot of these tweets as well from him recently. They've been circulating. And a lot of them that have been circulating about is about how him talking about how we must respect Christianity and how Jesus was such a great figure and was essential and just, something that I think Americans, Christians in the United States would be shocked to see or hear. And because we just have this assumption that so many Christians in the United States assume that, oh yeah, the enemy of Christianity is Islam. But when you hear, these religious leaders of Islam talk about Christianity, it's not like that at all. It's all fabricated. It was all designed for us to try to hate these people, hate our Muslim brothers. This is just, yeah, at least I think the great thing that, one thing that the big question that we were asking is like when this happens and if body bags start coming back, where will the blame be laid? Will they say this is all Iran's fault and we'll rally behind our troops and say we just got to back our boys no matter what? Or will we be a bit more rational and say, why did this happen? Why did you do this? And now look what's happening. Now our boys are getting killed because of it as well. And I think thankfully, this is the result already. I mean, because it's only been 48, 72 hours. And it's been, I think, an absolute catastrophe for Trump. And the Americans are not rallying behind this war. It's the exact opposite. So he's really miscalculated. I mean, this is he's got a complete mess on his hands. And I feel like there's two possible outcomes. Right, the U.S. admits that it's no longer the hegemon. It removes itself from the Persian Gulf and from the Middle East completely. It suffers a major unrecoverable blow like that from its prestige, or it goes nuclear because the U.S. can't do this conventionally. I feel like that's where we're at now. Those are the two possible outcomes. Do you see a third?
Well, yeah, I don't even want to say this, but okay, let's say, it's looking very bad. I agree. And for Trump, things are, the Iranians have hit back hard. They weren't bluffing. There's no signs that the Iranian government is falling apart or that the people are turning against their own government. Quite the reverse. We saw, I think, probably millions out on the streets yesterday, mourning the death of the Ayatollah. By the way, I think you said that it was his daughter also, his son-in-law, his granddaughter, and his wife also just very recently died, as a result of the attack. But anyway, so, so far it really does look bad. Now, I think the only chance that the U.S. and Israel could come out on top, in the end, it wouldn't even be a victory, but it would be, they could limit the damage that, to some extent, to maybe a fairly great extent, that Iran could do if they're able to very significantly degrade, their missile capabilities. And Israel is claiming that they have destroyed half their launchers. It's probably not true. But they're also saying that,
of course, it's not true. They never tell the truth.
Yeah, right. I know. Okay, but I'm just putting that out there. Just maybe this time, they, because I don't know. I don't think this is true. I just preface this, but this is what they're saying. And then they're saying that, like in two or 3 days, he said that yesterday. So it'll be in a day or two, you'll start to see a real obvious fall off on missile attacks. Now, if by some chance it's true, now we know that, okay, they are hunting the launchers, but that's hard to do, especially in a country the size of Iran. I doubt that I highly doubt that they destroyed half the launchers. I saw photographic evidence of destroying one launcher, and there probably have been a couple others. But again, we're talking about a very large country, and there are a lot of places to hide these launchers. It takes a long, long time. Again, we saw that in Ukraine. It took the U.S. a long time, to hunt down those HIMARS launchers, and it was not easy. And there's still some of them there. There still are some HIMARS launchers in Ukraine after all these years. But there was not just the launchers, but the U.S. claimed that they sent in B-2 bombers. And I guess they didn't describe the bombs, or they weren't described in the report that I read, but they went after underground missile facilities. And maybe they did some significant damage to them. That's like, So just say that it's a possibility at one end, but it seems more likely that what we're going to see, and again, I actually take this analysis, which I from Ted Postel, the MIT military technology expert, really the rocket scientist, is that he says in the first few days, okay, and maybe first week up to 2 weeks, the U.S. and Israel will deal devastating blows to Iran, meaning that they actually, in a short period of time, they can just deliver a lot of explosive payloads into Iran and do a lot of damage. And a lot of people are going to die. Many buildings are going to be destroyed. Some military assets are going to be destroyed. That's the big question. Are they actually degrading their military capability or not? We really don't know. But after that period of time, after about a week or two, they're going to start running out. And this is the other thing that we pointed out, is that they do have these very limited stockpiles. And it's just not clear that they can replenish them. And and then Iran will keep on going and keep on going. And yeah, sure, Iran will have suffered greatly, no question about it. But you can't really knock them out. It's just sort of like a 15-round fight, where in the first couple of rounds, you just go on, the one maybe younger but less skilled or something. Let's say, one of the boxers just, it goes after the other with just a flurry of blows and just pounding and pounding and pounding, it's really, and the guy's got a bloody nose and whatever. It looks terrible. But then you get into the third round and you notice that guy's really slowing down and he's just not doing it. And then the other one just keeps on, bam, hammering, and it goes in. And then you realize, man, we got another 12 rounds to go. What's going on? So I think that's most likely what we're going to see. I think his analysis is sound and is based on, my understanding of what the military capabilities are for both sides. And now, again, one thing is, I think we actually can say that we've said that, yeah, they weren't bluffing. And I think actually we're a little bit surprised about how extensive and actually very effective their attacks on these Persian Gulf states have been. They've gone after the military bases. One thing, this is not a scientific analysis. I think, like a lot of people, I'm getting these feeds on my phone and you can see the images. But just like for Bahrain, the naval facility there was just like one after another, and even slow moving drones coming in, boom. They're really hammering them. It's not just the military bases too. They have gone after ships. So even though they have not declared, we were saying this was a nuclear option. At some point, they may go to close down the Strait of Hormuz. It's already closed. They have not announced it. Okay, the Iranians have actually officially denied that they're closing it down, but they have already hit, I think, at least 3 tankers, and traffic has stopped. I mean, that's what the satellite photos show. There's just not a single ship leaving or entering, through the Strait of Hormuz. And then the world's largest shipper, Maersk, has said, we're not going through there. And we're not going through the Red Sea because apparently the Houthis have said we're at it again. So this is huge. But it was not just that. They are now actually hitting oil and gas production facilities. Again, this is something we thought, maybe this would be farther down, but they're doing it right up front. Right. And so now, like in Europe, gas prices have spiked 50%. The Europeans are such idiots. I mean, they're just so idiotic. I just hope that the Europeans will wake up and realize that the people that are ruling all over them are going to, destroy their civilization or what's left of it. Because the Europeans, by cutting themselves off, from cheap Russian oil and gas, and being a country, again, they produce very, very little oil themselves, nowhere near enough to meet their own needs. They have put themselves in a very difficult position, and they haven't built up the reserves. See, actually, if you look at, there are other countries that are in a similar situation, like Japan or China, or South Korea, for example. These are all major importers of energy products. Japan, for example, gets 80 to 90% of its oil from the Persian Gulf through the Strait of Hormuz. So they're going to stop, receiving. Again, they'll only get 10 to 20% of what they normally do, from starting now. Um, China, I believe, is 70%, is something similar for South Korea. But all of them, South Korea maybe at 60%, but all of them have built up huge reserves. So, for example, in the case of Japan, they have enough for 230 days because they looked at the situation, years ago and say, we are highly dependent on this oil. And so we can't just wait for something to happen. We have to be ready for it. We have to save for a rainy day. Even Australia, gets something like 30% of its oil from, and they have a reserve, to account for that. So these countries, they will be affected. Certainly oil prices are going to shoot up and whatever, but they can survive it. Now, Europe, it's just, again, because of the utter, incompetence that run that part of the world, they are in serious, serious trouble.